responded to you, who again you took the bait from, but also how, because of how you operate your Twitter as a, air quote, satirical Twitter account, there's always going to be the edge of, is he actually going to take something serious, or is he going to look incredibly salty? It's weird. To continue this thread of education, in the 5.5 years I've been on YouTube, there have been about 7 videos made against me. I've responded to 4 of them. 3 of them, though, no, because they had valid points. In fact, I've had very annihilated me. We discussed over Facebook and Skype, and honestly, I took my lump, because I'm a bloody grown-up. At no point did I go, oh yeah, but you've got like 1,000 subs, I've got 10. You're nothing to me, mate. I've got a best friend, everyone. You know what to do. It sounds like a bit of a segue. To get back to the original point, because of how you framed your tweet, and at no point did you say, don't harass them, people think you're encouraging it. If it was just a screenshot without a link to the video, this also might have gone under the rug, but it didn't. And it especially didn't because you took bait from Augie. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You know when you kinda get some criticism, you look at them, and then you look down at such thing as a person within community. Because as is the case with all commentary communities that have ever existed, they rise and then they inevitably fall. The moment you start thinking you are better than respect for yourself, and your audience will eventually start to lose respect for you. It is a place of arrogance. And as entertaining as you are as a comedian, you have to learn to take criticism. Earlier I used your video on Without a Crystal Ball to reference you, with no level of irony, considering you're criticizing someone who also can't take criticism. What a unique club to be in. Hell, she's even on your side. In response to what you said and all the disagreements you had on your totally satirical Twitter, Death Noodles, yeah, switching to that instead of you, went on a block. Death Noodles has been blocked because he's a grown-up yo and can take criticism. Of course, to him it's hate, not criticism. Okay, bit childish. I see a prevalent theme in this video. You're a man-child. Berwick had some comment difference between criticism and Death Noodles situation. There's a group of YouTubers who attempt to present themselves as the moral center of the commentary community. As I've earlier proven, they don't exist. They're not the moral center, they're to click. These same YouTubers dogpile on other YouTubers whenever they get a chance. Spoken with no level of irony for the lone wolf here. Sorry, lone kitty. These YouTubers bait people to respond, and when they get a response, they say the person is too sensitive for responding. I don't think you read the tweets that were directed at you the same way everyone else read them. I'm gonna skip to the end. This group of YouTubers are right now going on a stream where they will most likely read this thread and attempt to mock me. Yes, because you rather arrogantly said they were beneath you. That's what you said. Death Noodles is dishonest and an attempt to shield against criticism rather than addressing the issue. Truer words have never been spoken, Dennis. Grow up. Ricardo a second run through. So I want to now do I want to cover 3 instances. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home base app with too much free time, and I have a thoroughly diverse audience. And in a way that's somewhat expected, but because I'm so integrated with many commentators, I can occasionally lose sight of this, despite the fact that I know I have people who don't even follow what's going on with people like FouseyTube, despite it being spoken about non-stop in my circles. In fact, I clearly have a significant amount of people who are more interested in today's topic, which is also interesting to me, because although admittedly I am fairly familiar with the individual in question, it kind of falls outside the typical content that I would turn to. However, with that said, my Doug Walker video did very well, and that was, in a way, in the same vein, so I only think it's justified to discuss this person who, once again, some of you will be very familiar with, and some of you will probably have never heard of. Some of you might be big fans of him, others may despise him. One thing I know is that these less commentary, more niche topics provoke strong feelings within individuals, to the point where they may yield rather strong opinions. So I don't expect this to go down fantastically with everyone, but I don't do it to please everyone. I do it with people who want to enjoy my content, and if you want to come along for the ride, then you're more than welcome to join me on this lovely little road trip. And many people have asked me to do a video on this chap, so it clearly does have an appeal, and hopefully today I can provide a more impartial look at everything he's said and done, and give some thoughts and opinions. It's in the name. Also, once again, I know this will be a coverage of the topic, but I prefer to wait until all the dust has settled before pulling out the duster, if you know what I mean. It also allows me to have a look at what more can be said, rather than just observing the current drama that is going down. So let's briefly have a rundown of why Butch Hartman is of interest today, because on the surface, if you were just scrolling through his Wikipedia page, Butch Hartman has no right to be involved in the YouTube community. If you're an internet casual, like most people, you wouldn't be able to tell him apart from any other TV producer or animator. But as we're going to find out today, there's a lot to distinguish him beneath the surface. So to people who are unfamiliar with this gentleman, Butch Hartman is a multi-talented individual in children's cartoons. He has produced many popular TV shows. The one that you lot are probably most conversant with is The Fairly Odd Parents, a show that I used to adore growing up. It's the sort of thing that, in spite of its rather ostentatious attitude, just has the plots to really inspire the imagination with all these possibilities of a fantastical world that it creates. Given where I live, or TV service that we used to receive, I never really had the opportunity to watch it on a regular basis, so any time I did was a real luxury. However, that is merely a ripple in the ocean that is his career, and he has helped produce many other children's television shows, including Danny Phantom, Tough Puppy, and Dexter's Laboratory, which, although it's something that we wouldn't think about too much as kids, it's easy to see the striking stylistic similarities. Ooh, that was some nice alliteration. Anyhow, before I become too caught up in my own language, let me make it clear. It's no criticism that you have consistency in your animations. Plenty of franchises have a lot of overlap in their technique. If you can evolve storylines and characters in a compelling fashion, then having a formula for animation is merely an unchanging cog in a greater machine. But anyway, Butch Hartman, through this signature flair, created a real following. Typically when you have something unique and defining like that, it's what happens, much alike to Doug Walker. That whether you personally loved him or hated him, there was an undeniable appeal to what he created. He also really involved himself online, particularly using his Twitter as means to create a relationship with his fans, and often involving himself in many online trends and memes, leading to these same interesting results, although they were mildly entertaining.
He'd also provide his daily dose of wisdom, which typically inspired people to go and, well, retweet it. Can't knock the impressions, but Hartman clearly made good impressions. So why are we here today? Well, there have been numerous controversies surrounding some of his recent projects and also comments that he's made. People DM me and tweeted me about it, and eventually after working on 2 other videos that I hope are out by now, I contacted one of these people and said, hit me with your best shot. It is only fair to credit them as they have provided me with an extensive backlog of information, some of which I have used, some of which I have not. Their Twitter page should be up on the screen right now, so feel free to follow them. I'll also leave a link in the pinned comment. I knew about a lot of these situations on the surface because I saw a lot of discourse, and of course, any drama takes my interest. However, it is important that you feel fully informed on what's happening before you make such comments. So without further ado, let's discuss everything that has inspired such a sudden turn on a person and ask ourselves what can be drawn from it. It's hard to document this in a clear chronological order because a lot of things were revealed at different times as to when they had something known as O-axis. You see, in February, Hartman announced that he had departed Nickelodeon. The video was mostly him just fondly reflecting on his career with the company, with the notion that he left because he felt it was time. He had been working there 20 years, and as fun as something can be, sometimes you do need a change. So nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary here. He made a lot of vague, open comments that kind of gave him the option to go anywhere, while still remaining consistent with the trajectory. So June came around and he finally decided to make a serious announcement, one that would finally serve as a sufficient follow-on for his fans as to where his work was going. What was it, I hear you ask? Well, it was his own network. In a video titled I'm Starting Network, all in big, sexy capital letters, to really give it that emphatic vibe, he announced that he was, believe it or not, starting a new network. Now, this was presented as a competitor to all the other large networks. However, there was a spin. It was going to be in vain of many of the other regions have no deeper relationship with their audience, and says that he can present that himself. This is followed by a very interesting advert where he really talks about key values being eroded away by modern life, and then presenting the next solution. It was also announced that this was going to be a Kickstarter, with his initial goal being set at $250,000. This would cover the costs of producers and aid the creation of family-friendly shows about positive subject matters. I have to admit, it is an intriguing initiative in spite of the meme bait.
Oasis. Axis. Welcome to Oasis.
This initially reminded me of DeFranco's fundraising project to support his own independent network, and generally, as long as someone's transparent with the distribution of such funds, then I don't think you can really complain. And although I think it is necessary to talk about the worst things going on in the world, we can't constantly hide in the bubble of pseudo-family positive values. However, as a brief refuge for wholesome family time, it's not a bad idea, given the race to the bottom of sensationalism that a lot of the media do tend to be participating in currently. So although there was possible discussion to be had about the sort of values that Hartman would be adopting, it was mostly calm at this point. But there's always calm before the storm. You see, this is where it begins to become quite suspicious. After setting up the Kickstarter, he hit the target surprisingly quickly, with a number of donors from certain locations. Although it's completely reasonable to suggest that maybe he just had a devoted fan base with a few individuals who are fairly stacked, May felt there were some strings being pulled behind the scenes. Well, why on earth that? Well, Hartman himself has always been fairly well intertwined with deep core Christian values.
That's right. When I got into Nickelodeon, I wasn't a Christian. I was just becoming a Christian. I had just gotten saved, but I learned very quickly that you have to basically live as an example of Christ more than point your finger and tell people about him. You know what I mean? It's fairly unfair in shows like that. I couldn't do any real Christian thing in them as far as mention Jesus or the cross thing. But I could put Christian values in my shows. I put, happiness. I put truth. I put family. Like when I did Danny Phantom, I did, he's the light coming into the darkness. The superhero fighting the bad guy. So it's almost like speaking in parables the way Jesus did. You can speak to the audience without even saying Jesus. They can serve Jesus in your show. If you really have a goal or something you want to do, you can do it.
And let us be clear here, there is nothing wrong with having religious video. It is fairly safe to say he does not present the network as a religious venture. And as a donor, I'd say knowing the endorsements and vested interests of a possible recipient is key, and that he did actively omit it. But is this active deception or just a failure to disclose details that he deemed unnecessary? Well, that would depend on how much this religious agenda was involved in the platform. It shouldn't have really come as a surprise to anyone that this was going to involve Christian values. The idea that society is being eroded by media and there's a necessity to return to core family principles is inherently religious. Why were things like homosexuality, for example, absolutely abhorred by a lot of religious figures, and still are to an extent? Because they upsetted their social order. Now, the more modern approach is that they're friendly with that, and threats like exposure to violence, explicit content, and so on are more troublesome to today's youth than what adults do with their sex life. However, you can still see where it is rooted. What Butch is presenting is just a more modern version of Christian values. Given how much he utilized the Christian community, he probably should have disclosed this. He knows that he also has a young fan base of animators who probably don't know that much history to put the dots together on what Butch's values represent. He's made it no secret that he's a devout Christian, but I still think it's worth talking about, especially given how necessarily presented as an exclusively Christian streaming service. However, it was clear from the advertisers, from the fundraisers, from the comments that he made that he was trying to appeal to the Christian audience, and I think this created a justified concern with a more animation-oriented streaming site that is oriented for the viewer, which on principle is a pretty good idea. However, there were a unique set of circumstances that makes this unassailable, and thus rather unfair to not include.
We're going to speak to them in parables, guys. I am not making TBN. This is not TBN. This is not the church channel. It's not local legal broadcasting or Daystar. God bless those people. It's amazing. My stuff has got to be today. It's got to be hip. It's got to be cool. It's got to reach the secular people. If I put a Christian network out there, no problem. I got Christians. That's cool. But I'm listening to the entire other spectrum of the world.
You see, he is directly trying to appeal to two demographics that are pretty diametrically opposed to each other. Now, I'm not best friends with every animator and artist out there, but one thing that I will tell you is that in that community there is a proportionally high population made up by people who would be labelled by a fundamental Christian society as deviants, and many who have had overwhelmingly negative experiences with Christian values. How do you cater to people who want to impose them while still catering to people who want to oppose them? And listen, maybe there is a way. Maybe you can find a compromise that brings everyone together regardless of their background. However, you have to lay out how you're going to do that, what values you're going to promote. By omitting this information completely, it appears Hartman knew that this would create a conflict, and instead of addressing it, he decided that it would be better to deceive both parties into thinking that he could cater to both of them. And maybe he could, but he shouldn't have had the hubris to think that he could deceive them too, and that was one of the biggest mistakes he made. Butch Hartman probably had a vision and two core fan bases that he could appeal to, and maybe he thought that it was for the greater good. But sometimes not everyone is going to see your ends, and at the same time you have to acknowledge that your visions may be wrong. However, let's talk about his little vision, shall we? When I was speaking about Fusi, I referred to his fallacious appeal to celestial powers. And I have to admit, the last person I was expecting to compare Butch to was Mr. Erakat here. However, like Erakat, Hartman is clearly under the situation. When things have worked out with the level of perseverance they have with Hartman, it is easy to believe that a consistent level of motivation will continue to turn up results. However, many of us, particularly people who may be considering investment, need more faith to turn up results. Saying God's plan is all very well and good, but many people do not see it that way. And this was well expressed in the many videos criticizing him, and many incriminating clips showing the conflict of demographics that he was attempting to appeal to behind the other's back. So what do you do when others post videos that do seem to show a side of you that you don't want them to see? Well, in many instances, it seems the response has been to take them down. Generally, what was incriminating about this particular appearance was that it was somewhere called the Warnow Wealth Builder Conference. This is based around Lance Warnow. Now, I'm not going to criticize the conferences you talk at. However, if something seems credible, you have to address it. What do I mean exactly? Well, many people people point out that Lance Warnow has some interesting beliefs that fit in far too nicely with Butch Hartman's little escapade. You see, there's this doctrine called the Seven Mountains, which, well, is a whole different barrel of fish, really. It basically proposes that Christianity is losing its grip on modern culture and proposes techniques of working how to modernize its appeal while having the traditionalist grip on the values that they view as moral. However, here's where it becomes trippy. You see here, good old Dr. Lance, the host of this convention, is the person who was also very prominent in the creation of the Seven Mountain Theory. One of these seven mountains is the arts and entertainment industry, and in Butch Hartman's speech he gave, he makes some very suspicious comments that seem consistent with the dogma the ideology seems to be supporting. If you want a more in-depth look at all this, there's a very interesting document that I'll leave in the description below which sets up a little more than mere circumstantial evidence. So what people created now was a different story. Butch, not being an idiot, knows that if he presents this as a Christian network, no one will support it. After all, do many people here ever watch openly Christian channels? So many came to this conclusion that this was no longer a platform merely inspired by Christian values, it was a Trojan horse presented under the guise of family values, but actually implicitly smuggling in Christian ideas, without any of the backer's appeal or knowledge. Which, although certainly by no means a proven theory, does seem somewhat credible. When presented with a lot of this footage, including footage of him with other seedy Christian figures, it was swiftly removed. In fact, there have been multiple allegations of him removing content that incriminates him, which is obviously not a good look. When confronted with evidence against you, you have a few options. You can accept it, you can dispel it, you can deny it, but you sure as hell should not remove it. It only implicates you further, and at the same time, other people will just re-upload it. And as soon as you remove one, people will begin downloading and saving content that implies you have committed wrongdoings. So eventually this just made him look worse, and many commentators rightfully called him out, whether he wasn't thinking or saw it as the only way to save his bacon. It was a very poor decision. And when he decided to respond, well,
I'm not even going to look at it because the question's being asked by Doing. I'm not even going to look at it, and I don't care. Because you know why? Whenever you put yourself out there to do anything, there's always someone that's going to try and bring you down because they've never done anything on their own. And so if someone wants to do something and they want to ask me questions like that, that's one thing. But if someone doesn't do anything and they want to criticize, then I have no time for them. No time for them. So the person that asked that question, whose name will not be mentioned ever by my lips, I just want to tell all people like that, as I get back to safety here, that if you guys can't do it yourselves, you shouldn't criticize anybody else.
what was the question? Was someone attacking his animation skills? Was someone challenging the years that the veteran animator had under his belts?
Someone says, what do I think of the Axis Family Guy meme?
Oh, in a way, it may seem like a trivial moment, but it does imply a lot about how Butch responds to these criticisms. The only time you can ever appeal to such an authority is when the authority is relevant to the question. If someone came up to me and said, the shirt you're wearing doesn't match your jeans, I can't turn around to them and say, well, you're not a semi-famous commentator, so I shan't listen to your opinions. It doesn't make logical sense. On top of that, in my opinion, it's always a bad argument to use. It's incredibly arrogant, and although experience sometimes can aid credibility, it's not an argument in itself. All in all though, it's kind of worrying that someone of Butch's age, and I would hope wisdom, would make such a redundant point. And both these scenarios that seek to justify a comment tell a rather worrying story about it. Either he genuinely thinks that's a legitimate retort, or he does not. If he does, it means that he's going to have serious issues listening to those who call his judgment into question, because not everyone's going to be an expert. People will still have valid points, like the ones we've discussed in this video. I'm nowhere near as experienced in many of the areas that Butch has spent decades specialising in, but it doesn't delegitimise any of the points that are being made. However, if he's going to genuinely dismiss criticism like that, then there is no scope on Oaxis, because it won't go away. However, I feel he is smarter than that, and he's moreover attempting to appeal to the easily satisfied sect of his fans through reasoning that positions him above his critics, which in spite of the fact that it antagonises a lot of people, it emboldens his status as this sort of messiah to his die-hard fans, the ones that he as a creator benefits of the most. Either he views himself as a messiah, which is a recipe for disaster, or he wants to benefit off those who view him as a messiah, which is honestly worse. Delusion or deception. Even if his judgment was better, he has to sell that to people. And he seems so disinterested that the critics keep coming back, and they were working harder to convince people that he was wrong, to convince them he was right. There was no escape. There were a couple other scandals that I haven't discussed, not because they're not worth discussing, but mainly because they're kind of more independent to what we're talking about today. However, they definitely contributed to the shift in perception from this well-liked, inspiring animator to this rather suspect, shady character who favored his own vision over the well-being of his supporters. And as the pressure finally piled on, he responded more gracefully. So bearing in mind this criticism has been layering on pretty badly, Hartman had no other option than to address the highly justified suspicion surrounding this channel and the related ventures that he might be pursuing. These undertakings are in jeopardy, or maybe he just thought a more in-depth reply would shut up the detractors, or maybe he genuinely wanted to clear the air. So he posted this letter. The letter itself is eloquent, and in a way it does really all it can do: decline the claims. He can't deny the conventions he spoke at, he can't deny the way he behaved, and he can't deny any of the mishaps that occurred. However, he can deny the further conclusions that many people claim about a possible agenda, because that is theoretical. I'll leave a link in the description for you lads to go and read it and judge for yourself, but as responses go, it's fairly rudimentary. Nothing to write home about. Nothing you would throw him in too deep for either. Though I always feel like starting off by sending love when you're in the depth of scandal is a rather move. Check out my Greg Paul video explaining why exactly that is. Best to say the pleasantries until after you've dealt with the allegations. That's just a pet peeve in this instance though. It's not exactly the same situation. What do I think this says about the greater situation? So in my opinion, there are two plausible scenarios for this little charade. Because something's happening, it's just hard to necessarily label what degree it's happening to. On the one hand, Butch Hartman's idea of Axis was merely an innocent-minded venture with Butch's values at the heart. Now, Butch makes it no secret that his religious roots are highly influential on his values, and with this in mind, he thought he'd be able to reach his monetary targets by appealing to church associations as well. However, he didn't think that many people would care, or new people would care, and decided to try and keep the appeal separate. This was a poor decision, as when you're making content that's being marketed and catered to the audience, if a significant proportion of the audience is Christians who may perhaps believe more fundamentally that it doesn't matter which values you may have, because they might have values that clash with your more artistic supporters. And that's the thing, even with the most modest intentions, Butch has made a clear error, because the donors could really affect the direction the platform moves in. He had to disclose that, and failing to has really galvanized the wave of criticism against him. That's his own fault, unfortunately. With regards to the more advanced theories, they do line up well. Although it is possible that it is coincidental, his response of pulling footage that implicated him was unbelievably myopic and only made the idea that this was some sort of conspiracy more credible. Whether it was a conspiracy or not, I'm rather confident saying that it would have failed. Even if you try and insert subliminal messages, it still means sacrificing part of the appeal of modern media. I'm hard-pressed to honestly believe that he genuinely thought that such a plan could exert Christianity onto modern culture. It seems so ridiculous that I'm almost inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. But on the other hand, if someone is motivated by a cause, especially ones that appeal to a higher power like religion, it can often override a lot of logical reasoning. Celestial beings do not need justification because they transcend existence, which is why I'm always skeptical. Though I'd hope that with his experience, Hartman would be able to recognize such ideas as lost causes. However, if I gave Fousey shit for his approach, Butch Hartman doesn't get a pass just because he speaks with more authority or wisdom than our good mate Yusuf. Hartman not only behaved childishly himself, but he promoted a way of thinking that is designed to push people who challenged him down and telling those to trust him because of his accolades. Let me tell you something. The moment that you decide to trust authority because of the fact that it is authority is the moment that someone will seek to take advantage of that authority. And on the internet, we're more aware of that than ever. And many people clearly felt that they were being justifiably taken advantage of. And whether Hartman had greater plans or not, he was still asking people to trust his judgment, and it would just turn out fine, even with the vague language and the lack of details that he provided us. No. All it takes is one bad actor to fuck that up, and people were right to expect more, and he paid the price for not delivering it. However, plenty of people aren't that skeptical, and plenty of people will continue to look up to him, so he really needs to harness that responsibility. He has to try and hold himself accountable, because he can't guarantee that we always will. Anyhow, What do you think about Butch Hartman? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll do my best to reply to them in the first few hours, though I am really busy at time recording and a lot is happening in my life. I would love to give it a huge